What's up, you guys? I talk too much, and welcome to my new podcast series. In this series, we discuss personal experiences, topics of personal relevance to me, reactions to news article stories, hot takes on social issues, and personal opinions on social discussions that are going on in different communities. The reason that this podcast series exists right now is because I have these conversations in my streams, but I am often multitasking in my streams and I am being distracted, disturbed, interrupted very often, and my mind is racing 1,000 miles a minute. So my thoughts come out really jumbled and not as cohesive or as eloquent or as comprehensive as I would like it to be. And I also don't want to bog down my viewers who are there for the gameplay with my own personal sentiments and beliefs and perspective. But if you like my voice and you want to really just hear me talk about different issues and different things, then this is the podcast series for you. Enjoy. In this podcast, we are going to be covering anxious attachment styles, dismissive avoidant attachment styles, healthy and unhealthy responses and reactions during arguments in a relationship and during breakups, as well as the psychology behind it all, what motivates us, what drives us to do these things and act the way we act, and the good and bad perspectives of each attachment style. First of all, we have the anxious attachment style. Anxious attachment style partners crave intimacy. For them to feel secure and loved in a relationship, they need quality time with their partner. They need consistent, clear communication from their partner. They need words of affirmation and occasional reassurance of where they stand with their partner in the relationship and the direction of the relationship itself. Dismissive avoidants operate on a different and opposite perspective or approach to relationships. Dismissive avoidants, for the most part, have trouble with emotional vulnerability and often shy away from it. Dismissive avoidants also, for the most part, have trouble maintaining deep emotional connections with their partners. For a dismissive avoidant to feel secure in their relationship with their partner, they require a certain amount of space and freedom to feel unrestricted and be able to engage and disengage from the relationship as they please. These two conflicting and opposing perspectives and approaches to relationships cause a lot of problems or become very apparent during arguments and during breakups. Dismissive avoidance dislike stress and conflict, and when placed in a heated argument or a heated conversation, they tend to stonewall their anxious attachment style partners. The reason for this is dismissive avoidance feel overwhelmed not only by the topic of the conversation but by their partner and their partner's emotions. And for a dismissive avoidant, they have trouble being emotionally vulnerable. They have trouble forming deep emotional connections with their partners, let alone anyone else. And the idea of being relied upon by someone or having to rely on someone else is an idea that they are not fond of, and it somewhat repels them. So rather than sit there and have a heated, if not difficult, conversation with their partner and struggle to find the words to convey their own thoughts, it is easier for the dismissive avoidant to shut down, disassociate, and distance themselves not only from the conversation but from their partner as well. What goes on in the mind of the dismissive avoidant when they stonewall or shut down on their partner is something along the lines of, I feel overwhelmed, I feel suffocated. I feel like this conversation is putting a lot of weight and a lot of pressure on me. I feel like you are holding me responsible for your emotions and how you feel. And that's not my responsibility. I am only responsible for my emotions. I'm only responsible for how I feel. And you are responsible for how you feel. And this is too much for me to handle right now. I don't really know what I can say to you to get past this argument or to get past this conversation and to have a peaceful resolution. And I would much rather just take space to myself than to continue to waste energy having a conversation that is not going to be resolved cleanly or is not seemingly leading anywhere. From the dismissive avoidance perspective, it makes perfect sense to want to take some space from a stressful situation to process how you're feeling, to clear your mind, and to process your thoughts and think about what you are going to say when you come back. But the problem is the dismissive avoidant didn't properly and clearly communicate this to their anxious attachment partner. And so their anxious attachment partner doesn't see it as their partner is just taking some time to recollect themselves so they can have this discussion at a later point. They're seeing it as their partner is abandoning them. Their partner is leaving them behind, and their partner is creating this rift between the two of them so they can leave. And this causes the anxious attachment style to try to close that gap with the dismissive avoidant. And this often has the opposite effect of what the anxious attachment style is trying to do, which is to build a line of communication to the dismissive avoidant. This can often be through calling or texting or trying to see them in person. But what the dismissive avoidant is seeing it as is an invasion of privacy. I am putting up walls, I am putting up doors, I am trying to keep you out so I can work on myself and I can just figure out how I want to handle this, how I want to approach this. And you're not giving me that time, you're not giving me that space. And unfortunately, the way the dismissive avoidant reacts to it is to take more distance, further escalating the anxious attachment style's attempts to reach out to the dismissive avoidant. And it just becomes this ever escalating game of cat and mouse where one is trying to catch the other one's just trying to simply not be caught. I think it's easy to look at the anxious attachment style and their attempts to build a line of communication to their dismissive avoidant partner as unhealthy, a lack of self esteem, not knowing their own self worth, and all of these other toxic and unhealthy things. And don't get me wrong, I do think that is very unhealthy and is very toxic to not respect your partner's boundaries and to try to bypass any walls or obstacles that they put up so they can take time and space for themselves. But looking at it from an anxious attachment style partner's perspective, all they know is people abandoning them. And being ghosted, being stonewalled, being shut down on is not a healthy and it's not an emotionally fulfilling experience, especially when you are trying to engage in a conversation and you are trying to actually come to a resolution. It is very frustrating, if not very difficult, when the other person doesn't even want to engage in the conversation at all. And for an anxious attachment style, the ever escalating attempts to build a line of communication to their dismissive avoidant partner that is putting up even bigger walls of trying to keep them out, the anxious avoidant attachment style doesn't see those walls as I need to leave them alone. An imperfect analogy is gambling at like Las Vegas or gambling at a casino. You're down on some money and you try to double down to try to make up for your losses and you lose even more. So you try to put down even more money because you're thinking if I am just persistent enough, I am going to hit the jackpot and it's going to be worth it. But in the end, you only end up losing more and more money. And that is what the anxious attachment style is not seeing in the moment. In the moment, when they make these attempts to reach out, no matter how toxic, no matter how unhealthy it is to onlookers and people on the outside, to the anxious attachment style, they feel like this attempt has got to work. This attempt has got to work. No, this attempt has got to work. For the anxious attachment style, they feel like if they can just succeed in getting some type of reaction, some type of reply, if they can just bring their dismissive avoidant partner to the table and have a conversation, no matter how combative, no matter how frustrating, no matter how difficult, they feel like it will be worth all of these attempts, all of these efforts to reach out to this person. But the reality is often quite the opposite, because the dismissive avoidant, if anything, is frustrated and terrified of the anxious attachment partner, because they keep putting up walls. It's just like, dude, I locked the door, I locked the window, and somehow you still find a way in. That's disturbing, especially for the dismissive avoidant. And I think a healthy way for both attachment styles to deal with arguments is, if you feel as a dismissive avoidant that you are hitting your limit, the mature thing is to communicate, hey, this is getting too much for me. Is it okay if we just walk away from this conversation? We walk away from this topic and we can revisit it tomorrow, or we can revisit it in an hour, or revisit it a couple of days from now. Because walking away from a conversation abruptly and not communicating it to your partner is unhealthy in and of itself. And it often leaves the other partner feeling resentful. It leaves them feeling like they have been left to hold a bag that they don't want to hold by themselves. And I think the healthy thing for an anxious attachment style partner in a heated argument to do is, if your partner is shutting down, if your partner is stonewalling you, the best thing to do is not to try to reach out, at least not excessively. If you are going to reach out, keep it a short and simple message. And if they respond, they respond. If they don't, you let that person have the time and the space that they need to get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If they don't get back to you within a reasonable amount of time, then, just walk away. Just walk away. Breakups often pan out the same way, with most initiators of breakups being dismissive avoidance and anxious attachment styles begging, pleading, and chasing after their exes. I have to edit this in because I wanted to go fully in depth about breakups between anxious attachment styles and dismissive avoidant attachment styles. When you are an anxious attachment style and you've been broken up with or dumped by a dismissive avoidant, and they have ghosted you, they have blocked you on everything, you feel discarded. You feel this abrupt cutoff as this deep, profound sense of abandonment, that there is something inherently wrong within you as a human being, and there is something inherently unattractive within you as a partner, and you feel worthless. And you're unable to get the closure, you're unable to get the answers that you need, so you can at least to some extent process what happened and that it's ending. And you go to more drastic measures to try to bypass blocks, try to bypass any walls or obstacles that are preventing you from communicating with your ex. And from the outside looking in, you come off as crazy, you come off as this disturbed, unhinged person. In reality, you're just feeling broken. You're feeling broken. You're feeling unwanted. And you feel frustrated because you know that you're not like this naturally. You know that you're not this unstable person. You're not this low self esteem, low self worth individual. You know that there is context. You know that there are different variables, different factors, different ways that led you to this. And in your attempts to try to reach out, in your attempts to try to get past any obstacles so you can build that line of communication, so you can get these answers, so you can get that closure, you don't feel like you're crossing lines. You don't feel like that. It just feels like, why won't you talk to me? Why won't you just simply give me the closure or the answers I need? Like, is it that bad? Is it that hard to just sit down and just talk? And for the dismissive avoidant, because I want to be fair to the dismissive avoidant as well. Perhaps when they ghost and when they block and when they cut off former partners, they feel like it is the best thing that they're doing, not only for themselves, but for the other person. Perhaps they feel like by cutting off the other person cold turkey and abruptly, it makes the healing easier for the other person. It doesn't prolong the breakup, it doesn't prolong the separation, it doesn't draw it out. And it allows them to not have to take accountability for choosing to end the relationship. It allows them to not have to deal with those negative emotions. It allows them not really have to face the other person. Because when you are ending a relationship, it is a unilateral decision. And it is especially heartbreaking when the other person is trying to fight for it and the other partner doesn't believe it's worth fighting for anymore. And for the dismissive avoidant, it probably works best for them because they don't have to confront the other person. They can make this decision, and because they've had time to mentally prepare for the decision, because they've had time to think it over, it is easier for them to move on. It is easier for them to move forward and to feel less guilt or less shame about what they've done. But for the anxious attachment style, this often feels like it comes out of nowhere. And it often feels cruel. It often feels unusual. It often feels like you hardly ever knew your partner. Because to the anxious attachment style, they put in so much emotional investment, so much intimacy into it. And the idea that somebody could just abruptly cut them off and just ghost and just disappear is overwhelming, and it just shakes them to their core. It is even more particularly sad because dismissive avoidants are really good at compartmentalizing. And what I mean by that is very easy for them to end a relationship, to cut off and sever connections and ties to an individual, and then suppress and push down any feelings of negativity, whether that is heartbreak, whether that is loss, whether that is guilt, and to be able to separately move forward with their lives and in very little time get into a new relationship or have new connections. And this is relatively because most dismissive avoidants are averse to emotional vulnerability. They have trouble or do not want to build deeper emotional connections with people. They don't like being relied upon and they don't like to rely upon anyone else. So, a lot of the time after a breakup, it is very easy, if not very natural, for the dismissive avoidant to get into a new relationship where there is not the same expectations placed on them. There is not the same pressure on them to reciprocate certain feelings, certain emotions. They don't have to be as vulnerable. They don't have to build the same level of emotional connection or commitment to the other person. And they can move as freely as they want to be. And the anxious attachment style is quite the opposite. They invested a lot into the relationship. So when the relationship is gone, there is this desire, there is this urge to try to fight for it. There is this need to try to make it work, to try to salvage it, to try to bring it back and resurrect it. And it takes them a longer time to process the breakup, mainly because there is a lot of conflict within them. Not only are they trying to accept the reality of the relationship being over, but they are trying to reach out to their partners who are growing ever more distant. And like I said, they are good at compartmentalizing, they are good at living their lives separately and independently and not really feeling the loss, not really feeling the guilt, And the anxious attachment style is often really torn up inside, you know? And what's ironic is it's only when the anxious attachment style has mourned the relationship, they have fully processed their own emotions, and they are emotionally detached from their dismissive avoidant ex, that they're able to pursue new relationships. And it is only at this point that the dismissive avoidant makes a U-turn and then begins to reflect on the relationship, reflect on the negative feelings that have been suppressed and buried for so long, and start to desire their partner again. But at this point, the anxious attachment style is emotionally unavailable. And it is, I think, infuriating because you should not have to wait till a person is gone to then decide that, hey, this was a good partner, this was a good relationship. I probably shouldn't have thrown it away. I probably should have fought for it. And I think that that is a problem with modern dating as well. That's going to be a topic in another podcast. The problem with modern dating is that people feel like they have a lot of options. People feel like they don't need to invest or they don't need to try as hard to make a relationship work. And so when there are problems or when there's a more attractive or like a more aligned option available, people are willing to drop the relationship that they are in. And the thing is, what people don't understand is that a relationship is work. It is a continuous renewal of investment in your partner mutually, right? You can find someone that's a better match for you. That does not mean that that person will be invested in you the same way as your partner who literally did everything. And I think people need to really think about that. People really need to think about that before they end relationships, not just because they feel bored in it, but also because they feel like they can find something better out there. Is your partner someone that is considerate of you and your feelings? Are they trying to integrate you into their life? Are they trying to understand you, your feelings, your desires? Are they trying to meet those requirements that you are wanting in the relationship itself? Are they willing to communicate with you even in the toughest and the roughest moments? Are they willing and able to forgive you? Ultimately, are they willing to invest and are they willing to be in this relationship for the long term? That's what's most important. My own personal experiences with like anxious avoidant attachment styles and dismissive avoidant attachment styles is I had a couple of exes that were like that, where I'd say there's only been two so far that I have really just been like head over heels, that I went out my way to like chase and beg and plead to the point that it was just unhealthy and toxic. And it was really only after I let go that years later, one of my exes from college had reached out to me and wanted to talk. It was at that point that I was already like emotionally detached and completely over the relationship, completely over the idea that I had of them as a person, that they actually reached out and they wanted to continue talking to me and would constantly initiate conversations with me and reach out to me without me having to initiate anything, without me having to say anything. You know, I wake up to missed calls, missed messages, all of that stuff. And another not so related one, I was talking to somebody 2 years ago, and eventually we fell out. And for about on and off for a year and a half, I tried to rebuild some type of line of communication. I would reach out, think every 3 or 4 months, I would be like, hey, hope you're good. Hope you and your child are good. You know, hit me up. I would definitely like to talk, so on and so forth. After about a year and a half of doing that, I stopped because I just realized I was not going to get a response. And, you know, it probably wasn't their number anymore. They probably changed their number. And it was only as of this December, early December, or probably late November, that they had reached out to me. And I was astonished because it's been about another year. And so it's been, what, almost 2.5 years? And so I'm thinking to myself, why did it take so long for you to reach out, for you to respond? And they told me they didn't really know what to say. They didn't really know how they could come back after everything that was said and done and after so much time had passed. And like the anxious attachment style, it took a while. It takes a while for me to get over a relationship or to get over somebody. But when I do, I'm just fully out of it. And it was just ironic because I'm at a point now that them wanting to talk to me, I'm not interested in the same things that they're interested in. And after 2 years, you can't expect somebody to still be emotionally available for you. You can't expect somebody to still be willing to invest time in you or to want to pursue anything with you. And so I think that's very, very important for people, whether you're a dismissive attachment style or not. Just realize that you don't have forever. You don't have this infinite spawn where you get so many lives or so many opportunities or so many retries or so many resets. There is a limited amount of opportunities and you are on a timer. Even if you don't know it, even if the other person doesn't know it, there is a timer. At some point, you think less and less about a person. At some point, you no longer are attracted to the idea of the person and you're no longer attracted to the idea of the relationship with the person. But what do I know? I talk a lot.